Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with eVOLUTe Performance Coach Timmy Gallagher. Coaching evolved for him as a calling to be of service to others in their evolution of performance and leadership. His wisdom and experience comes from over 30 years in law enforcement, corporate government, education, not-for-profit, spirituality, endurance athletics, and coaching certification, allowing him to be agile and present in coaching conversations. The totality of his roles and experiences are revealed in his calling to share his desires and talents as a coach. He's a fascinating person. Enjoy this interview. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me. I've listened to your show and I like it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And before we get into your life as a performance coach, we went through quite a time the last couple of years with COVID. It really altered so many things about our lives. So I'm curious how you survived that time period and how it subsequently has changed the way that not only you live your life, but the way that you approach your business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I heard you ask some of your other guests that, and it made me realize I think my evolution in coaching actually came out of COVID, and I never thought of that before.
That's the one thing that's been interesting about all this is that there's been so many things, whether it's an idea or a business or a song or a book, so many things have ultimately been silver linings about this. And it almost seems as though this is a part of your narrative is that, with the world slowing down and doing what it needed to do during this pandemic, it brought to life something very unexpected for you.
I think you're onto something there. And it's interesting when you said that in my coaching, I often talk to people about out of every circumstance or outcome, there's a gift and opportunity. And really, you're opening me up here, Joe, because I'm thinking about it. Coaching started with literally a knock at the door, a guy looking for coaching, but he started on that journey, I think, because we're in the midst of COVID. We started going within, literally and figuratively, right, and rethinking things, and then it got me rethinking things. As I started coaching him, he was like, dude, you got to do this with other people. You're a natural. So I really appreciate the question. I never put that together, and it's brilliant. Good stuff.
That's excellent. The one thing that I noticed over this time that's interesting coming from just an employment and a coaching human perspective is that I saw all these signs for unemployment consistently. And even to this day, you'll go into a place, like we went into a restaurant last night, and they're like, we're running slow. No one's coming in. And I was thinking for a while, can the government be giving out that many checks to people so they're just staying home? But I think people reevaluated their existence. I think that's more of the case. And people were willing to cut corners and not do things for menial pay or go after the vision of their lives. Are you noticing that with people that they've recalibrated their existence and they're going after things they never would have before?
Really good questions, and they're playing right into what I do as a mental fitness coach. So I think yes, but no. I think some people, real quick, and I know we're not doing the interview per se, but the brain, I work with the brain with people. Your limbic system is what is wrong. That's your survive mind. Your thrive mind, which is your right hemisphere and your prefrontal cortex, that's where creativity, feelings, imagination, arts, intuition come from. That's like where jazz comes from, okay? That's your right brain, but the neural pathway to that is not as open as your survive brain because survive brain is 3 to 5 times stronger. It gets first bite at everything. So, to your point, depending on where you're at in your perspective and your mental fitness, shall we say, you either went further into your cave and turtled up, or you used to pivot into that other part of your brain and say, what's next? What is it really about? What's deeper for me? So I think yes, and I think no. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a part of it that I think you're hitting something very key that I thought about this entire time. Yeah, I think there's a part of this unemployment crisis that we're going through that it's been a part of recalibration. There could be people that are getting checks, but I think what you said about, turtling up or moving forward and pivoting is that whoever we were before this began, ultimately mutated into things that were going to be positive because we were positive or negative because we were negative. So whatever we were before, we had to take that and move in a different direction. I know for me personally, I have a son that's special needs, and I've constantly had to pivot his whole life. And when this came up, it's just a part of what I've always done. So you really have to take this life and understand, especially during this last couple of years, that there was a monopoly on the way that we had to live our lives, and everyone was in the same boat, and you had to make it work the best you could.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's really interesting. There's a lot to discern and dissect there. One of my mentors, a Franciscan named Richard Rohr, one of his latest books talks about there's an order to things, and then there's a disorder, and then there's a reorder, which that's sort of a code for the Pascal mystery and all that, or the hero's journey. But I think what people, the country and the world for that matter, are seeing is we had an order, we went through this disorder, and now we're finding our way into this reorder, individually, societally, culturally, and in our worldview. And it's interesting. I think the real factor in there is where, and this is where I come in, where's your mindset? Do you default to your limbic system, which is your default, or did you pivot into how am I going to thrive out of this? And we're really getting to see what people are made of, for lack of a better term. You follow? I mean, like, I dig how you pick up the jazz stuff, because it's like there's music, and then there's some people that said, hey, we can riff on this a little bit, jazz. And here's the idea of something happened, what are you going to do with it? You going to riff on it, or are you going to let it riff you?
It's interesting. I was telling the jazz community, because I really, really ramped up my interviews in a way that I never did before. I had to have that moment when it happened in March of 2020 and say, what am I going to do? And it kind of evolved, but I talked to more musicians than I ever did before and realized during that time that they were the perfect artists for that time. They're thrown into the unknown. They have to make something beautiful out of it, and they do it under uncertain circumstances. And more times than not, they come out making people happy and doing something extraordinary. I mean, there was even extreme cases where there was one very prominent New York City pianist that literally completely left. I could hear weird macaws in the background squawking, the ocean, like he was out. Like he went from this concrete, urban landscape of New York City, living this ultimate dream, to saying, I'm out. I'm bringing my dog. I'm bringing my life. I'm coming here. So there's a lot of fascinating things that even in that community that improv pivoted them to go geographically to places they never thought they would.
Yeah, and I would be interested with that person in particular, or other people, if we work with this order, disorder, reorder, where that person ends up on the reorder. What does it sound like a few months from now or a year from now? It's a very interesting time if you're willing to work through it versus letting it work you. You follow?
Yeah, and I thought about catching up, because when we talked about it, I think it was in June of 2020, and there was still a level of uncertainty. Like, people are doing things different now, but when we come back, what's it going to be like? And it's been 2 years, and I think things have been so reshuffled that it would be very interesting. So I may follow up with you on that and give you the real skinny. So you can hear that interview and the follow-up. So that's gonna light a fire for me. So I want to kind of get to the essence of what you do in a way that everybody can understand out there. And let's go to a career day in front of third graders, fourth graders, and one of the kids looks up at you and says, what do you do for a living? How do you explain that to them?
The short version is, I help you evolve. Now, for a third grader, that's going to be, you what? Like, I'm just looking into what I'm eating for lunch. So it's how people that want to get to their best self, get to the next level, or for that third grader, it's really interesting you bring that up, because when I work with adults in coaching and I work with mindset, and again, it's the brain. We move from the survive brain to the thrive brain, which is the limbic system, to right brain, prefrontal cortex. what we end up returning to is actually who they were all along. See, we're born with this natural essence, a call. Let me put it in jazz terms. You're called to play a tune, your own tune, and it's a jazz. You're just going to riff. Forget the normal power setup of the music. Just go with your version of it. But as we go through life, things happen, and our limbic system kicks in, as it should, because the limbic system keeps you surviving. But with that comes the voices, that egoic voice, the judge, our saboteurs, and it moves us further and further away from our true essence. So by going back to that, you only rediscover what you had all along. And usually I actually have them use a picture, and the picture's usually like grammar school down, before they got inundated with all the defense mechanisms. So that would be very interesting if a kid that young said, what do you do? So I guess the answer is, this is a hell of a long time to explain, give you an answer, but I'll help you get back to where you're at right now. It's going to go away.
Yeah. What's so interesting about the way you describe that is that I find the subconscious to be a fascinating place. Like when you dream, it's like your real relaxed self that kind of gets buried will come out. Because I'll wake up sometimes and I'll have this dream and I'll do something in the dream and I'm like, man, why can't that happen in reality? Not that it wouldn't, but just the way it manifested. And I think that there's something about the way the brain works. Like that whole quote where whatever you're really looking for is usually right in front of you.
Yeah. Indeed. And it's interesting you bring up dreams. I just returned. I went on a 2-week solitude and silence retreat. And it has to go back with my spiritual disciplines and things like that. But one of the facets when you do that, because, you're unplugged, no phones, no nothing. I'm literally in nature. And one of the facets you look at is, okay, use me while I'm dreaming too. Let my dreams teach me something. And as you know, dreams can be very surreal and doesn't make sense, but just pull some things out of that. And what I would submit to you is if you can pull a few nuggets out of what really resonated with you from the dream, and then stay open to that in your awake world, watch how the dots connect.
That's interesting. I'm curious, in your life, if you go back to your childhood, what was your childhood like? Where were you born and raised? And how did these seeds get planted in you to become who you are? And then even before that, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm laughing because, and I'm not making this up, it's the holiday season and, the Christmas shows are on. And my wife and I, Mary, watched one of the quintessential Arthur Rankin Bass Christmas shows, with those kind of puppet kind of figures, and it was Santa Claus is coming to town, that one. And Santa Claus grows up a redhead, and I was a redhead, it's sort of white now. But, Joe, I literally, as a kid, thought, all right, Santa has red hair, he likes giving gifts and all that, I want to be Santa Claus. I really thought I could sign up to be Santa Claus. And
that's
it's
awesome.
Sort of cute now, but actually, you can. You can be that giving type person. But and I'll tie this into your question and what I spoke about earlier. And then life showed up. Guy was an alcoholic. Mom was abusive. Listen, it wasn't a horrible family, but it certainly wasn't the best. But my brain does what it's supposed to do. Okay, you're getting hit. Here's how we work with that. You have a father figure that's not around. Here's how we work with that. And there's the saboteurs I talk about in coaching. So that ended up showing up in my, I'm doing air quotes, personality. And I'm what we call a stickler, or if you follow the things like the Enneagram, that's like a 1 energy on the Enneagram. And there's nothing wrong with it per se. In fact, sometimes that energy works. Like as a stickler, I'm very perfunctory, very good little boy. Like with you, I realized I don't have a link, and I started freaking out. And it can help in situations, but sometimes to use it, let me back up, to use it all the time, every time, it's too much. Yeah, frankly, I come off like a pain in the ass, just like an anal retentive pain in the ass. So it's, well, then who am I really? And then you return back to that kid that wanted to be Santa Claus, which in my saboteur world, that would be more of what we call a restless or a 7 on the Enneagram. And dig this, they're very joyous, happy, and free. Instead of having a lock schedule, they just go with it. It's very jazz-like. You follow?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. No, that makes sense. And my spouse has a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of those things that you're talking about that manifest. But I think it's all about empathy and perception, because I didn't perceive that when you didn't have the link. I guess my perception is it's confusing because I can't be clear up front. So it's like, my rote thing is to apologize because I wish I could be a little bit more. But the beauty of this is that it usually turns into a happy thing because people are like, oh, cool, audio, let's go. I rarely get people that are like, oh, well, I have to do video. Maybe a few people have said that. You know what I'm saying? So it kind of turns into this other thing. You know, the interesting thing about what you're talking about, when you talk about childhood and trauma and going through things, and you study the brain, does your brain ever get to a point where it heals from that? Or is it an ongoing therapeutic thing that you have to do it for the rest of your life? Or do you finally get over that and move to the other incarnation of yourself? And how does that work? How do you think?
Wow. These are great questions. I just wrote a piece on the incarnation. Obviously, during the Advent season, it's all about the incarnation. So to answer your question, yes, your brain can get better. And that's what I do in coaching. So you have the survive brain, and on the other side, you have the thrive brain. So it's, well, how do I get this neural pathway going? It's presence work. Call it mindfulness, call it meditation, call it going for a walk and being aware of your breath. There's a lot of ways of doing it, because what we know from the scientific studies is when you are present, that activates the neural pathway to the right side of the brain. It's proven scientifically, Joe. So 10 seconds or longer of a presence exercise, 15 minutes or more each day on a consecutive basis, you'll improve that neural pathway. So you can reactivate what has been dormant, so to say. And this is also shown in Joseph Chilton Pierce did a great study on brain surges. And there's times when there's about 5 times our brain will surge. It grows in these neural pathways. It's usually around age 1, 4, 7, 11, and then age 14 to 17. And what is really important when this happens is that the brain, and by the way, your eyes are the only external part of your brain. Your brain, your eyes, your body, all your senses have, you ready for this? A role model to show you how to do it, and then an experience of how to live it. And dude, I keep coming back to the jazz thing, which I was jazz taught because of jazz, but like, that's like jazz.
Yeah.
Look at these guys riffing and just flowing with it and going with it. And isn't it funny how you can parlay that into, that's exactly what we've seen in our brain studies. So, yeah, it can get better. The challenge is, as we get older, we get more set in our ways. This is how I play this tune. I will never diverge from that tune. And you may play that tune really well, and it's beautiful, but like sort of like a one-trick pony. Like there could be more in you to share with others, and that's why it's important to be doing some type of presence work. And that's what I do as a coach, to help people activate that brain and body so they show up more jazz-like.
Man, that metaphor is just right. It's just reverberating through the whole thing here. That's great. You know, speaking of role models that you touched on, who's been your role model or hero in life?
Another good question, and it may sound like it doesn't make sense, but my dad was number one. And what's interesting about dads, and gets a little subconscious and a little spiritual, but the first I believe, the first other person we meet is our father. Because my mother and I were one. We were literally connected. In fact, I envision when we're born, it's this, what is going on? I am being expelled from what is my universe, and now I'm being cut. The cord is being cut. So mother and I are one. Father's the first other I look at and go, who are you? On a conscious and subconscious level, right, Joe? So that becomes the role model. That becomes my first experience with another person, which is why I believe a lot of what we believe of God or a higher power goes back to our relationship with that father or father figure, right? And this is why we see, like, I'm a retired cop, a lot of crime is done by men. And when you talk to them, what they didn't have was that positive male spiritual role model. They didn't have that person, let's put it back in the jazz world, of, dude, here's how we're going to riff with this, and here's how you're going to flow in with that, and just be cool with it. So my dad was my primary role model, in spite of being drunk. And by the way, he got sober, and when he died, literally on his deathbed, Joe, I was kneeling next to him. We were totally cool.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful. So what's been one of the best client responses you've ever gotten from the work? One that kind of reverberates with you or you remember really clearly?
My first client, which was the guy that knocked on the door, is still with me. It's been quite a few years, and he will often say, just keep doing this with other people. That says a lot. It means a lot. I also had a female client who had a lot going on. And coaching is not therapy, right? Coaching is where you at, where do you want to go? Therapy is where you at, how did you get here? What's behind you? And often coaching and therapy run parallel, which is totally appropriate. I had one lady who, she had spent 4 years in therapy, and we did 4 months, and she said, I feel pretty good. I'd like to move on. 4 months with you was better than 4 years of therapy. And
wow, that's wonderful.
It is, and let's not get twisted about it. That's not about me. I don't want to pump me up. It's about her and I and the process, and us both being open and vulnerable to it. You follow? Again, it's like those musicians getting up on stage and we're just going to go with this. There's beauty in that because it works on a much higher, deeper, and bigger level than just that egoic, limbic type survive brain. You follow? And that's why the key thing I need from people if they want coaching is, are you willing to be vulnerable? Just like if you want to play jazz, are you willing to be vulnerable? Are you willing to go with it? If not, going to have a tough time working this out. It's going to be very static.
So let me ask you this. If you could meet one person alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to meet?
It's a good question. I heard you ask other folks about it. So because I'm a stickler, you said they're alive right now, yes?
Yeah, or it could be anybody. We could go into the annals here, whether they're alive or not around anymore.
Well, I heard you ask one of the guests, and my answer to if it's someone alive right now went somewhere it would have never gone before. And it actually went to Pope Francis. And it's probably because I just saw my one mentor, Richard Rohr, he's a Franciscan, met with the Pope. I think actually the Pope wanted to meet with him. Richard's just a tremendous guy, and he's in the twilight of his days. And so that made me, and Richard had a great experience with the Pope, and I'm like, okay, that sounds like a guy worth meeting. Like, if he was good for Richard, he's good for me. If it's someone that's not alive, it may sound cliche, but I'd like to meet this dude called Jesus. Again, whether you go for the Christ thing, there was a dude named Jesus. He had a hell of a message. The other one, and it's going to choke me up a little bit. My dad.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back and talk to my dad. I would really like to, because my life has gone so many different ways since he passed away, and it went that way because he passed away. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but, and part of me would want that approbation of like, what do you think? Am I doing the right thing? Am I your good boy? But more on a level of like man to man. I'll go back to the jazz thing. Like, could we just have a conversation where we riff? Just what's happening with you? What's happening with me? How are we still connected? Because I believe we are. It's just harder to see and feel that. So, yeah, there's a panel. The Pope, Jesus, and my dad.
That's cool. Yeah, it's interesting. I always think about that with my dad. I lost him in '08. He was 64, which is, for whenever I say that, people are like, that's young. But, he went through a lot of health struggles, and I always think, he watched me, like, as a journalist and going in the media and doing all these things and never actually got to hear me on the radio. And I always think how cool it would be for him to have that moment. And the irony is that he was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and so many of these musicians in the world of jazz live in Brooklyn. And it's so wild how your life will kind of reverberate around your core. But it's always that tail that you're going to chase, that desire that you want. So when you look back on your life, all these decisions that you've made and the wisdom that you've accumulated, if you did have a dream tonight, you ran into your young version in your 20s, and you could impart that young version advice that you've gotten from the decisions and wisdom you've gained, what would you tell your young version?
I've actually written that letter, in therapy and different spiritual work. But I guess the short answer to that is it'll be okay. And here's why it'll be okay. A lot of what, again, if I'm going back and talking to young Timmy or little Timmy, is a lot of what you're experiencing is your brain, just the way the brain works. And here's how your brain works, limbic, 5, prefrontal cortex, all that. And here's how your body assimilates all that. So just know that it's not you. You are bigger than what is happening around and in you. And the journey is to get back to that true you. And to that point, find that mentor, find those experiences, find that music you're supposed to play, to go back to the jazz thing. Thoreau, who's one of my favorites, talks about something to the effect of most people lead lives of quiet desperation, and they go to the grave with the song still in their heart. So don't let all this stuff that you're feeling and thinking stop you from playing your tune. The world needs to hear your tune. And I think that's what's happening now for me at 50 plus years old. It only took this long.
Well, I've noticed that. I just turned 50 here in October, and I noticed that there's certain things that came more under the microscope, and it's not even a premeditated thing. It's just something that kind of becomes a guttural urge that you feel like you have to kind of rectify because we're pretty far down the path. So you gotta start doing things that you want to do.
And Joe, I think that's part of that order, disorder, reorder. I do a lot of work with men and do a lot of male spiritual work and initiations and things like that, rites of passage. And frankly, one of the things we've seen, particularly in our white, egoic, kind of privileged male society here in America, is we haven't had enough experiences and been open enough to really have wisdom. We have answers versus wisdom. Wisdom is when you get to that other side of things, and that's when you really start. In fact, it's not even that you show up and say it, you just show up with that energy, and then people want that. You follow?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's a different way. So that's probably where you're at. What do you think your dad would say to you if you got to meet him again?
Oh, I think he would be happy. I think I think he would be really happy that all of this happened. I think he would be. I've actually, I did kind of have. I've had a couple of dreams. I had one that was kind of like a religious revival in a barn, and it was very vivid. And he was in there. But the thing is that when I dream about people from my life, it's not just. It's not even that I sense them in the way that either they were or they are now. In a physical sense, I feel it. There's a feeling, but I know who it is. You know what I'm saying? It's just a real ethereal kind of a thing. But I think he would be happy as to what happened. But the unfortunate thing is that, you know, when the father leaves the room and the family tends to fight, I think that probably would weigh on him. But I think probably what has been done otherwise may outweigh all of that. So we'll see, you know.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you mentioned. Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
It's interesting you mentioned the feelings, because when I work with folks and we talk about dreams, a lot of people get hooked up in, well, you know, this person was there and that person was there. And one of the biggest takeaways from the dreams is what you said is, well, what was the feeling? You know, and then remember how I spoke about then when you're in your awake life, see if that feeling, those dots connect. Like you're in a moment and then that feeling, you're having that same feeling again. Then it's, okay, now what's showing up in your real life? So the connection isn't just like, all right, I talked to my dad, will I see someone that looks like my dad, or will I see like a red cardinal? It's also about the feeling. So I would encourage you to look for that, you know, where that feeling pops up. And I'll go so far as to say, maybe when you get that feeling in your awake world, your father is present.
Yeah, and I've thought about that. It's so funny you say the cardinal. That's like his favorite bird, and every time I see it, my wife will point it out too. It's like she'll say, hey, you know, check it out. And they'll come around at very, very odd times. And, you know, yeah, so it's funny. It's funny how all of those things happen, and if you're open to it, it can manifest in really good ways.
Well, yeah, I think that is the point. The signs are always there. We're just too much in our limbic survive brain to see them all the time. Because here's the bottom line. If you told me, hey, Timmy, man, I saw a red car and I was feeling this, it was my dad, Joe, I can't tell you that's not true.
Yeah.
I can't tell you that. If it was real to you, it's real to you.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it goes both ways. So it really is, I mean, it's faith. You know, well, there's no God. Okay, dude, that's what I believe. And God bless you.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
So, yeah, I would roll with that a little bit more.
Yeah,
see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So everyone out there has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your clients, fans, but ultimately you're in control of your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, that I really learned when I was on my rites of passage, and what I learned there, and that's a traditional initiation that men need to go through, but that I'm a beloved son of God. And I don't really get into that with my coaching, but what it does get into is there's a core essence of you that is way bigger than what people say about you, about what happens to you, about what you do. Just there's an energy. You know, like there is an energy, an inspiration that a musician brings to that jazz piece before it's ever a piece of music. And that's beloved. So I'm a beloved son of God. Now, how that shows up for some people, that's their business. I mean, my grandma taught me what most people think of me is none of my business. And frankly, if I resonate well with you, it's only a reflection of what's in good in me is in good in you. If I resonate poorly with you, it's just a reflection of something that's not reflecting well in you. And I, because of how I am, my wife always tells me, like, I either bring out the best or the worst in people. I'm like Guinness beer. It's like an acquired taste. You either seem to really like Timmy Gallagher or you don't like me. And I'm willing to grow from that. The question is, are you? So what most people think about me is none of my business anyway, but I think I'm beloved.
Oh, I would agree. Absolutely agree with that. Timothy, let's get to the good business here. If anybody out there wants to know more about you and what you do, hire you, anything related to your world, where do they go?
LinkedIn, Timmy Gallagher on LinkedIn, or eVOLUTE Performance. That's on LinkedIn too. And of course, I have a website, eVOLUTEperformance.com, and there's a TimmyGallagher.com too, and that'll eventually get you back to eVOLUTE. But I'm evolving. That's where I get eVOLUTE. And if you are someone out there looking to do that and it resonated, let's have a chat. I don't even get into talking about compensation until we're sure we're a good fit. So there's nothing to lose. Not even going to cost you anything. We can just riff, so to speak.
Like we did. We just had a successful chat set.
Dig it.
Yeah, I totally dig it. Yeah, Timothy, you're wonderful, man. Thank you for opening up. Have a great holiday season in 2023. I appreciate it.
God bless. God bless, Joe. Thanks, brother.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube or Spotify. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.